This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by the Genesis Company, coming at you Thursday afternoon. It's October 26th. I got Britt Robson from Min Post here with me. Britt, I just got finished rewatching the game from last night, and I don't know if I went into the rewatch like overlooking for KAT and Rudy stuff because, obviously that was a pretty major takeaway from the game last night. Watching it live was that, man, the KAT and Rudy stuff didn't look good. It looked worse watching it back. Again, am I hyper fixating on some of those teams? I mean, I know the excuses. First game, I do think Toronto low-key is a pretty bad matchup for the way
certainly,
the roster is
they
constructed.
have a lot of springy wings, right?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I don't know. There's obviously an ant element to all of this too, but 24 hours ago, on a scale of 1 to 10, where were you at with your concern for the KAT Rudy pairing and how that was all going to work out this season versus kind of what's your 1 to 10 now, 24 hours later today? Did it change?
I think from 5 or 6 to like 8 or 9.
Oh,
I mean, I've never thought. I said in the thing I wrote for Min Post that it's going to be glitches. They are not going to work together. I mean, I've been saying that for a long time now, and I'm not trying to be a jerk about it. I just don't see how those two guys. We've seen them both on the floor. Mm-hmm. Seeing Rudy, as long as we saw him individually on the floor without KAT last year, just reaffirmed to me how a guy like KAT sharing the floor with a player like that is not a good mix. Right. And then if you see KAT, and you remember, we've seen KAT for like 7 years before Rudy got here. How does a guy like Rudy Gobert make KAT better on the floor? I mean, I just don't. But given all of that, I still think that they are a very good team. I think they win despite that pairing, not because of that pairing. I've always felt that. I mean, not always. I felt that way perhaps since the infamous last preseason game of the year when we actually saw them play together. But, let
me ask you about the positive part of it, right? Like what I said to Kyle when we went on last night after the game was double big pairing looked terrible. Ant shot really inefficiently, and they got boat raced in transition, yet I think to your point of the talent of the group, they were leading after 3 quarters on the road and ultimately only lost by 3 to probably I think we predict Toronto to be a league average-ish team, right? Maybe they'll.
Yeah, I think they're between 37 and 40 wins in the East. I feel like that was a winnable game that they lost because they have terrible court IQ. In addition, I mean, I will tell you right now, even more than the big man pairing, which you focused on, I just focused on the absolutely ridiculous decision-making that happened all the time. I mean, the shot selection, KAT driving in traffic and ignoring open threes, pump faking until he was covered and then driving. I mean, just and Ant deciding he had to go 1-on-4 every third time down the floor. They don't trust each other at the end of the day. They don't trust their teamwork. And it's I'd love to, I know I'm going to sound like a Finch apologist, but if you were a coach and you saw the preseason, as we all did, what would you think? Would you think this team is actually ready to move the ball and to play as a team? I mean, that was the whole thing.
Yes, I would have.
They looked really good. They looked like a team. They looked like they wanted to move the ball around, share the ball, occasionally take their turn if they really felt like they, were on it for that particular time, particularly with guys like Ant. They fell apart at the first sign of. Well, we know from 2 years ago when the Wolves played fly around that the nearest comp by far was Toronto.
Yeah.
Toronto plays the exact same way as the Wolves did 2 years ago. If they pressure you, they put you into turnovers, and then they run.
Yep.
And they don't play big, but they play aggressively, and they close out, they trap. And so the Wolves should have known all this going in. I mean, the scouting report on that kind of thing is take care of the ball. Don't make stupid mistakes that they're counting on to take advantage of.
To expose you in transition, yeah.
34-12 in transition is why they lost the game at the end of the day. And a lot of that transition came off really stupid shots and really bad positioning. Shots that were so bad that no one was in a position to get back because they thought the play was yet to unfold. And instead, Ant and Kat were busy short-circuiting shot clocks. And I don't know. I mean, and
Finch said after the game that 75% of the transition defense problems in that game were about the offense, which I think is echoing what you're saying there.
Exactly. And then another 25% is just simply not getting back, which is another thing they don't do. It was very disappointing to me to see this because I was thinking that Kat would be different because Kat was acting different. Kat was going to, he had a new mindset, It really felt like he had a new mindset. He wasn't me in the glad handing, please don't kick me guy.
And basketball-wise, he looked different. He played a different style of basketball in FIBA this summer too. I mean, a lot of people seem to be making a lot out of, he's been very different in the media. I don't take that to be a huge behavioral
I think it's very, very difficult for him to do that.
Yeah.
So
I guess what I'm saying is I don't care. I don't see that as a data point. That's my opinion on it, or a very small one.
Right.
I think, and that's why I'm reacting to the basketball difference.
Yeah, the FIBA, he was quicker to shoot the three and more confident to shoot the three.
Playing the four. It looked like you watch Karl in the Dominican Republic tape, like right away, the first game I watched of that, I was like, wow, this is awesome. They're playing him as a four. They're putting some like 6'8" guy playing center the exact same way Rudy does, just shorter. I'm like, this is awesome reps. And then Karl looks great doing it. And you're like, wow, can we copy and paste this into the season?
Right.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe FIBA is not the best thing to copy and paste. One game. I don't know. I think
we do have, we have one game-itis. Although I will tell you that if they were like 6-3 and they lost last night, I'd be saying the same things. I mean, they sucked out loud in terms of they're a better team than Toronto. By any measure other than execution, they're a better team than Toronto. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they didn't execute because of stupidity and because of selfishness, or ego, whatever you want to call, ball hogging, stupid shots.
I think that the term is basketball IQ.
Yeah.
Then it's about basketball and not. I don't think they're stupid people. That's what you're saying is they play basketball stupid.
I mean, I don't think that they're dumb. Obviously, but I guess that clarification needed to be made. It is aggravating to see a team play the right way when it doesn't count, and as soon as it counts, play poorly, play without any court IQ. That, to me, I want Mike Conley to say something. I want an organizer. I want Slow-Mo. I want Finch. I want somebody to just not wait till after the game, get in the huddle and say, what are you guys doing? Settle down. Share the ball. I'm
just flashing back to Kyle in the Pelicans huddle.
Exactly.
Game maker time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, Rudy was his usual stumble bum self, but he was also playing really hard and relatively effectively.
No, he played really well. I would say we're still talking about the KAT and Rudy part here. I think there's actually some credit to be paid to Karl too. I think Rudy played a better game than Karl did.
Right.
Overall, they both played well when they weren't playing with each other at times. I thought Rudy defensively was really strong when he was out there with Nas or Kyle as the four next to him. And then Karl in his first stint playing the five in the first quarter there when they did the stagger, they brought Karl back in for Rudy. Bam, post up. Next possession, 3. Next possession finds Nas. Next possession, post up. And he's scoring. I mean, he was effective in that time when he was at the 5, and that should be a weapon for this team this season. Right. I think I head to the Miami game on Saturday, and it's like, man, if you can stagger it out and Karl's playing against Thomas Bryant in the second unit, like he should be able to eat on the block or wherever, Right. But he only ate in the first game at the 5. He had 19 points in the game. 14 of those came with Rudy off the floor. And the 5 he had with Rudy was 1, a layup with 3 minutes left in the game. And then he hit that 3 with 0.3 seconds left in the game of garbage time. I mean, it was, and 20 of his 36 minutes were with Rudy. So he did all of his real individual offensive production, the good KAT things, the best parts of his game when he was out there by himself, which was maybe kind of predictable.
And inevitably, and I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that it goes against all the financial shenanigans this team has pulled, I would have said, yes, inevitably, they're going to turn to slow-mo. Inevitably, Kyle Anderson is going to be the guy. He may have led the team in minutes played last night, for all I know. It certainly felt like it. He certainly led the team in minutes played in the second half.
Yeah, he played 30 minutes overall.
Okay, I mean, how many in the second half?
I can pull that up here. Second half, he played 16, which was more than everyone other than KAT, Rudy, and Ant. He played the fourth.
Okay, that's funny. I thought he played more. But anyway.
Well, you felt him. Your point is you felt him, and you felt Finch feeling him. I mean, when things were bad, when the transition D got bad in the third quarter with KAT and Rudy on the floor, boom, timeout, Kyle into the game.
Right.
Closing lineup at the end of I was kind of like, who's going to close this game? Because I felt confident reading the game script that Finch was going to close with Kyle. And I'm like, well, what does that mean for Rudy or KAT? Are one of them going to be sat? And then I called it a half measure, which I think it was, by putting Kyle in there to close at the 3, which is not going to be an option when Jaden's back,
Yeah, I think that was politics. I really do.
Yeah, and that I was real. I knew we could feel that there was a legitimate argument for not closing with both of the bigs in that game, and I tweeted it out at the time. I'm like, I'm really curious to see who he closes with, because is it politics or is it the and I don't know. We're not in Finch's head,
but I mean,
like politics.
On the other hand, Ant missed a wide open shot and KAT missed a wide open shot. In the last possession where they really had to get a score. They had 2 good looks from their 2 best scorers, and it didn't happen. But I mean, I get what you're saying, and the doubling down, not only in terms of KAT and Rudy, but in terms of Nas, and any reasonable person has to look at their bottom line, their payroll sheet, and say, how the hell are you going to afford Kyle Anderson? And meanwhile, yet again, despite the fact that it's the worst look for them that he's the best player on the floor, he was the best player on the floor.
So like going back years, like 3-4 years, like I've always had a curiosity about a real rim protector next to KAT, way before Rudy was never, considering that. When Miles Turner's name was out there every single deadline for the 2020s, I was like, I'd be curious to see what, I'd be interested in that. Right. Next to KAT. So like, I cop to having been a person who was curious, and probably if it were me would have made a Giddy center look next to Karl. I would have done that too. But I was thinking about it just because they played Jakob Poeltl. And I'm like, speaking of half measures, like, just what if it would have been a half measure and you just went and got a Jakob Poeltl,
right?
Rather than a Rudy, and it's like Rudy's for sure better than Pirtle, and Rudy played well in this game. I really,
Yes.
I think I'm higher on Rudy's game last night than you were, but I'm
No,
talking
I
about
actually
this
thought it
globally.
was. I thought it was good. I thought you're not going to change some things. My opinion of
Yeah.
Rudy is similar to my opinion of KAT and Rudy,
Sure.
which is that it's not what it should be. It's not what they're paying for, but it
Right.
will. It can suffice under most circumstances.
So just back to wrap the Pirtle thing. It's like,
Yeah.
so I'm thinking about it naturally because they're playing him. I'm like, they're very similar archetypes of players, right? Pirtle and Gobert. And I looked it up. I'm like, what did they give up again for Pirtle? It was like a first and 2 seconds at the deadline last year when he was on an expiring contract. Like that was a pretty hefty price to pay.
Right.
And then they re-signed him to a 4-year, $78 million contract, 19.5 every year, which is less than half of what Rudy will be making every one of those years, and probably for about a fifth of the draft capital that that the Wolves paid. It's in these times when it doesn't look good that this is when my mind and other people's minds wander there. But it's a tough blow to start the season with as bad as the two of KAT and Rudy look together. And I think it's only natural for your mind to kind of wander into like, why did this happen?
This brings me back to what I keep trying to say, which is Pirtle doesn't care if he doesn't shoot. Yeah. I mean, you get that vibe from him on the court. He knows what his role is. He works at his role. He does what he does. If he gets the ball, he's kind of surprised. And at the same time, he has a good floater, I mean,
push shot.
I don't think that KAT would be trying to force the ball down to him.
You don't think there would have been like 12 high lows to Pirtle? Yeah.
What the hell was that? And so again, that's what I'm saying is that reputations and fit are two different things, and both have an impact on talent. If your fit is bad, your talent isn't as good. If your reputation forces things that shouldn't happen,
right?
I do think that one of the draws the Wolves made toward Gobert is, hey, we're going to use you. We're going to unlock your offense. I
thought we were over that, man. I really did.
Yeah.
Well, honestly.
And maybe it was just simply because there were occasions last night where he was one of the better offensive options, quite frankly. But at the same time, at the half court, how many times was it a single action or two actions rather than just a little bit of probing? How often did they try to probe, or how often did they try to get Toronto to overcommit on that defense? They had no baiting at all of that defense. They did not play intelligently in terms of understanding what Toronto wanted to do and using Toronto's aggressiveness against them, which is what teams that beat the Wolves 2 years ago used to do all the time. You can do that. You had a guy like Mike Conley on the floor. You get, people like KAT and Ant. I mean, you have the talent to basically move the ball around and stay disciplined, probe until somebody overcommits and then pounce. I mean, you can do that. And
it wasn't structure or flow last night.
No. But more than anything else, I thought it was
last season.
See how good we are. No, it was also kind of like, even more than last season, it was like, we're going to prove that last season wasn't anything at all because we're so much better this year.
Right.
And I'm going to show you right here, rather than this is what we do that's different than last season. Swing.
Right.
Give me some passing, I mean, it just 0 for 6 from the bench in the first half, 7 assists and 7 turnovers in the first half. And that was the better half of the two they played. I mean, that's what's crazy.
Quick break here. Today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company. I heard it was packed there for the season opener on Wednesday night. And again, they will have the game on for the home opener if you're not going to that game. They are, however, having a Halloween party that night simultaneously. So it's one of those where the game's going to be on, but if you show up in your Wolves gear and you see somebody dressed up like a banana or something, it's Halloween weekend. But Falling Knife is the place that we're always pimping on here to go check out the games if you're wanting to watch with Wolves fans. And it might be Halloween, but I do think that will be a fun game to watch with other people. So that's Falling Knife Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis. And then also one more quick announcement. We are giving away those 2 tickets via the Genesis Company to the game on November 1st against the Denver Nuggets. To register to be in the raffle for those, just send us a message on Patreon. If you're a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA, we will get that in quickly. We will be picking the person who will be going to that game. Again, it's a section 110 lower level, kind of middle of the court. They're really nice seats. So get your name in there for that. And we will let you know if you have been selected for the game on November 1st against the Denver Nuggets. All right, Britt, let's talk about Ant a little bit here. I think that is I did hyperfixate on KAT and Rudy, but a big part of the story of last night's game, as crazy as it sounds, given how hot he started, scoring the first 10 points of the game for the Wolves. It's crazy to look at his stat line at the end of the night and see 8 for 27 from the field, while he shot 4 for 7 from 3. So it was 4 for 20 from 2-point range. It was, I put down in my notes, just you cautioned about this kind of exact type of game happening in your season preview, where I think you nailed it. And Ant has clearly ascended. Like, Ant is better than he was last season. There's some danger about that being a double-edged sword, right? Where he can kind of stab himself in the foot with that, obviously, by taking some bad shots and maybe not moving the ball in the way that this team needs him to do. It was kind of exactly that. It was way too much Ant show with way too little effectiveness shooting from the field.
And in classic Ant fashion, he owned all of it, of course, after the game. And I wonder what the statute of limitations on that is going to be. I wonder if in like year 7, when Ant goes, "Oh yeah, I did that. That's all on me." At some point in time, accountability only works if the behavior changes. If the behavior doesn't change, then the accountability becomes emptier over time. It becomes a way to shut down real scrutiny. Instead of saying, Ant needs to atone for this, you can say, well, Ant's already taken account for this. So we don't have to, we can drop the subject now. And I don't know, I'm not there yet because he's 22 years old. And I think he is
game one. Yeah.
Carrying the mantle of, he is the guy to anybody outside of the Twin Cities who has any doubts at all who this team is. And I know we're not supposed to talk about who this team is, but there are 2 timelines and there are cliques. They're not cliques that exclude other people, but there are cliques that naturally have come together. I mean, Nas and Jaden McDaniels have worked out like during the off season with poor Nate Knight as the third a few seasons. But I mean, they really did have a thing where they, if you get in the gym, in the middle of the summertime with people and no one's thinking about basketball at all, and you're working on your game in anticipation for what it's going to be like 3 or 4 months down the road, that's a bond. And Jaden and Nas haven't, and Ant kind of joined it this summer and kind of knew about it anyway, just because Jaden and Ant and Nas are close. And they're really, and they're the same age. And let's face it, Mike Conley, Kyle Anderson, Rudy Gobert, and Karl-Anthony Towns, That's the other star performers on this team. You look around, those other three are going to congregate themselves. They're the ones that are going to, be interested in, what the latest thing that, hip hop is dropping right now or whatever, or, what's streaming in some place or whatever, So
good pop culture references there.
Sure. I think I probably dated myself.
This is what 24-year-olds do.
The opposite direction. Streaming. How do you think streaming's cutting the edge? That's interesting. You heard my hesitation, didn't you?
I did.
I knew I was.
I wanted to see where it was going.
I'm just hip to the new vibe,
Yeah.
So obviously, guys like Rudy and Karl and Slow-Mo and everything are like younger than me, but probably feeling that way to them,
3 of 17 from mid-range for Ant, Brett.
Yeah.
17 of them.
17 mid-ranges after Finch said, what we really want to do is, reduce the mid-ranges.
And he's historically been a really bad mid-range shooter.
Yeah, better at three than from 2.
I mean, so it's like 3 for 17 is 18%.
Yep.
But his career average is 34%. So it's
exactly. If he hit 3 or 4 more, he would have been on his
2
pace.
or 3 more. 2 or 3 more is what that would have been. I mean, which I guess if you just do the math directly like that, that wins the game, right? if you get 4 or 6 more points. But the thing to focus on is the 17 there.
Yes,
I mean, that's
exactly.
What the hell.
17 mid-range shots is, DeMar DeRozan would be embarrassed.
He averaged 5.7 mid-range shots per game last year, which was too many. We came in and Finch said that. I mean, like it's just whatever. Like that can be cold, right? Like you can get away from some of that, but there were a couple. What I noticed a little bit more of was like intention from him of starting in the mid-range, which is kind of like one possession stood out to me. It was a post up. Right? It's like semi-transition post up to him, and he kind of gets it in the mid-range there, looking for it. And he actually does like pass it to Rudy, but Rudy is 2 feet away from him because he's posting up, and then like Rudy tries to drop it off to Karl, and then that was got stripped in the flail, and and I don't know, maybe Karl did.
No.
I don't know if he got fouled, but that it's that it's going the other way, and I mean Ant shouldn't be shooting that many mid-range shots, not just because of like analytics, but because you have 2 players on your team that occupy that space. Rudy occupies that space. And Karl, as a driver or cutter, 2 things he's really good at, occupies that space as well. It's just, I think at some point in Ant's career, that's a valuable thing to have in the bag, Devin Booker style.
Sure.
At some point, but that makes more sense. It makes more sense for Devin Booker to do that in the roster constructions that he's been a part of in Phoenix, more so than it does for Anthony Edwards, not to mention.
But let's get.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably
interrupted
what you were going to say. Devin Booker makes them.
Yeah. That is what I was going to say.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you're shooting 3 for 17, that means at some point in time, you're like 2 for 8, 2 for 9.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to stop.
Yeah.
If you're 2 for 9 and your team is going down this drain offensively, have the self-awareness to say, hey, some of this is on me as like the team's resident superstar. The one's been crowned like king of the NBA this year. Maybe I should stop missing mid-range shots. Mm-hmm. And see if there's a better look than me missing mid-range shots out there on this possession. That's what I mean about stupidity. I mean, it comes back to have some self-awareness about what the other team is doing and how you can counter it and how you yourself are best able to counter it. And it isn't by shooting all the time. And if you have the gravity and he has the gravity, give it to somebody else. And one of the reasons that Kyle Anderson is always effective is because I really think he looks at the floor solely in terms of who's open and who isn't, and goes to the open man. I mean, a lot of people get assists from slow-mo that are not like your stars.
Right.
I don't know. I guess I want to reiterate that Mike Conley was an invisible man last night. He hit some nice threes early, and he didn't play a bad game. Although Schroeder got off, I think led the team.
It was more like Conley right after the trade deadline. Conley.
Yeah. All I know is that he needs to be more of a leader. He's one of the intelligence gatherers on that team. When the team has a poor court IQ, it's up to him to remind them how to be playing smarter. Yep. And I don't think he did that enough. If he tried, then apologies. And, it's a shame they don't listen to him. But whatever happened out there, somebody's got to be the adult in the huddle, right, and do something about it. And I know, there are already a bunch of Finch haters in my timeline about, how he's, not doing this or that. But I don't know. I repeat that, they look good in the preseason, and Finch had every reason to believe. And Finch did say, let's talk about this for a minute. Yeah. Finch sat Karl before Rudy, which was new.
Yeah.
And he played Troy Brown an early thing. And I think that was Shake Milton being so bad right away.
I think the Troy Brown was Jaden not playing, right? And needing, and I guess wanting to add another person to the rotation.
I guess that's it. Yeah. Although
I don't think Troy played did Troy play in the second half? I don't think so.
No, he didn't. But my point is that Jaden was hurt the last 4 preseason games, and Troy Brown didn't necessarily get a lot of burn in those either.
I think it was, I think what kind of messed it up was to the kind of the bench point in which you're struggling with the KAT and Rudy deal offensively. Right. Ant's not making shots. That's the time where you want the next guys. You mentioned Conley. I would say could have got more out of Nas in this game, but really like the bench, you didn't get anything from Shake until in the third quarter. You kind of did.
He began. I think he
was nice in the third.
One of the weaknesses is that. And Finch and others do this in the front office, I think, and certainly Finch does this, says, I think this guy is X. Well, that doesn't mean he is X right away. Finch thinks that Shake Milton is a point guard. He might be, but he's not an immediate backup point guard. He did not look like a point guard out there his first stint, you know? And so maybe think about the fact that the guy's played point guard, according to Basketball Reference, 10% of his minutes in his first 5 years in the league. And now he's with a new team in this new role. Maybe, put some better ball handlers out with him or something. I don't know. But not have not rely on him necessarily to be a point guard right away. Although, again, it may be, this microscopic look, and that it's just first game jitters and he'll be fine. But because he did get better. He had a much better second half.
You remember that when Jim Pete talked about how good Nas is operating out of the corners?
Yes.
Remember that? And when it was Nas.
That was Shake's pass.
It was Shake, which Shake's kind of thing is that like baseline drive. He's got that 7'1" wingspan where he kind of like goes out of bounds, but not out of bounds. Slung it to Nas there, and Nas takes him off the dribble there. Like that. It's like that type of playmaking creation, I feel, is really bankable from Shake. But I think, to your point, it's not the traditional, like, at the top of the key. Right? Yes. I think in the half court, like at the top of the key, just from having watched some of the Philly stuff, I think when he's doing that, he's more of a scorer. And he's more of like a off-ball playmaker, when what Finch wants him to be is an overall playmaker. And then maybe, or a point of attack playmaker, and then maybe more of a shooter off ball. too. So I think the glass half full on Shake is figuring out his role,
right?
And
he's got an NBA body. It's nice to have that kind of size in the backcourt when you want it in the pinch. I mean, that's something they didn't have. Noel, Forbes, and Rivers. None of those guys were large last year. And so it's good to have somebody, who can knock around. And Pat Bev.
I mean, this team needs some size, man.
Yeah. Well, we haven't talked about the physicality, which was awful in the second quarter, and and it just, and the third quarter for that matter. And
being big doesn't make you physical. I mean, that's what we learned last season. I think this group can be physical. That's when they win because of their size, is when they are both big and physical, which happened so few times, last season. And to win the high 40s amount of more than 45 games, like, you're going to need to impose that size, And
what's interesting is who led an attitude for this team last year?
Led in what?
Who had the attitude on this team last year? Who was the enforcer?
TP.
Exactly.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
They
could have
used him in that game.
Oh, they could have. They definitely could have. It is a shame that so many things. I mean, the things that you thought you had in your pocket, and you were looking at the things that were sketchy. The sketchy things were sketchy, but the things you thought you had in your pocket were sketchy too.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think this team was going to miss Taurean Prince, because I thought they put some good pieces into, what was going on.
Well, and that might still be the case. But a guy who can knock down threes, play in transition, and cop an attitude are the three things that Taurean Prince does, No, that's
and
true.
all of those would have come in really handy.
I saw this floating around out there kind of as a disproof. Like, the Wolves starters had a 81.3 offensive rating, which, that means that they scored 0.8 points per possession, or
per game, pretty much. 100 possessions is a game.
Yes. And that is a crazy low number. The worst offensive rating in the NBA last season was Charlotte at 109.4, which is a big step up from that. But I would caution to remind people that when KAT and Rudy shared the floor last season, not an insignificant sample size, they had an offensive rating of 107.5. They were a terrible, terrible, terrible offensive team when Karl and Rudy shared the floor last season, worse than Charlotte. So I don't know, 81.3 is a terrible offensive rating too, but it not
just means that everybody else didn't do anything either,
Yeah.
But
this is why this team was 23rd in offense last season.
And what do you think? I mean, because individually, Rudy Gobert did not look bad on offense last night. And at the same time, I mean, we need to break this down a little bit if we can.
Let's do it.
Because what is Gobert denying his teammates on offense by being on the court? I think one of the things he's denying them is fluidity, because he does own a particular circle around the basket that is, it's like Rudy has his turf he covers on defense, and less obviously, but still tangibly, I think he has his turf on offense too. I mean, you're not going to kick him out the way you might just automatically kick Vando out or something, and you don't want to slight him. At the same time, he has led the NBA in field goal percentage and has done really positive things on offense, albeit in a system that was grooved to him at both ends of the court. I just don't understand. KAT and Rudy should not be as bad as they are together on offense as they are. And I don't know why that is.
I mean, it's a lot of reasons. They're in each other's way. There's not there wasn't a structure in place that I felt balanced that out last night. I mean, I think that's just the necessary thing here to make it work with Rudy, which might not be the best thing for KAT or individually, or might not be the best thing for Ant. But I mean, you need to have more structure in the offense to make it work for Karl and Ant if they're on the floor with Rudy. Like that's why we're talking about the Ant post up, the mid range is all that. Like, the reason they're playing from that range all the time or getting tough floater range shots is because they're in each other's way. And they could have made a lot more of those. You run that game back, like,
on
you
the
make
other
a lot
hand,
more shots in that area,
making a
but
lot of floaters is not going to win you any rings.
yeah, yes, but maybe not floating it over Rudy's head as many times as you did. It's everything that they did in that,
right,
sub 15-foot
the
range.
focus on Gobert is the easy part for me to see as being damaging. I'm just trying to understand. I mean, all the ways that are. We talk about Gobert's, his very presence creates a better defense. Well, does his very presence create a worse offense? I think for the Wolves, it has.
Yeah, but it wouldn't if you went 5 out. But that, you don't want to do that because you have Anthony Edwards, who is this slasher. You don't want to do that, or Finch doesn't want to do that because he doesn't want to stick Karl in the corner in that sort of way. But I think ultimately they're going to have to come to a decision on whether or not they're going to tweak the offense more towards making that work with Rudy in the mix or not. And last night it was or not.
Right.
Whenever they got stuck and things were in the way, it was like, all right, let's try another high low. Or Karl had different opportunities where he could have just taken it all the way himself and missed them.
I don't understand the logic behind, and Finch says this a lot. He says, Karl is much better than somebody you just stick in a corner. Well, if you put it that way, sure. This is a shit assignment. We're not going to give him a shit assignment. Well, what happens if the quote unquote shit assignment actually is a pretty good assignment for this particular guy? If KAT makes 6 threes from the corner, what does that do for the rest of the offense?
Well, and it's only, again, last night, 20 minutes with Rudy, 16 minutes without him.
Right.
It's not going to be in the corner in the 16 minutes without him.
Right.
So it's like, I don't know. Could it be the 10 of the minute, half the minutes you're with Rudy, half the possessions you're with Rudy? It's more of a perimeter orientation for Karl, which it is, but his orientation is perimeter at the top of the key, not the corner.
And he's always been a great top of the key shooter, and he was terrible last night. And he never looked like he was in a rhythm. He never had his usual KAT thing going on, and I don't know why that was. A couple of times, I just don't understand the up fakes. One of the things that used to be really cool about KAT was his catch and release, really, really quick catch and release.
Yeah.
And his first impulse was to fake that last night.
And it wasn't in FIBA.
No. And I think it was to basically judge. I think he wanted to put it back down and take it on the deck, or catch people jumping around at the up fake and hit the low man. KAT's first 2 dimes were wide open layups for his teammates. And it got progressively worse.
First.
Yeah, exactly. It got progressively worse after that. And
do you remember on the broadcast Grady saying Karl just walked by the table and told us he's going to the basket for the rest of the night?
I had forgotten about that, but because I was busy watching the game. But that's an absurd statement, isn't it?
It depends on who. If it was the 2018-19 team where you're surrounded by 4 guys on the perimeter, by all means.
The fact that did he mean it literally? The crazy thing about it is the offense is I'm going to the glass every possession from now on. I mean, oh, well, I hope your teammates know that. I mean, it's like, holy shit. Think about that for a second,
No, I know. Well, and what happened shortly thereafter? They started getting boat raced in transition.
Yeah.
So they don't. Here's the thing, right? It's not that they can't make this work. I think Finch actually feels pretty confident that there are ways in which to make this work. I don't think the players do. I don't think the players know what that is, particularly the main ones, Ant and KAT. Like, I think they're hearing what Finch says. But, there's like that difference between like, what is that, being a visual learner or a hands-on learner? You know what I'm saying?
Yep. I know exactly what you mean. And I hadn't thought of it that way before, but I think it's really worth considering because Finch is a true believer about it. I mean, when you speak to him, he half convinces you, just like he half convinces his players, I guess. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that have to execute it.
Yeah.
And if they don't execute it or they find their teammates not executing it, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if doubt creeps in or it's an important time. They cannot stumble out of the gate too badly.
Yeah.
They're going to catch Miami the night after the Heat play the Celtics. There's only one game that's really circled in that twosome for Miami, and it's going to be the Celtic game. I mean, whatever happens the next night, if they beat the Celtics, they'll be okay with it. So that's a winnable game against a very good opponent. It's a good test of, can you be the type of team that gets luckily low-hanging fruit? And if they don't win that game, they get the Celtics soon, I think within the first week or two. That is
let's talk about Miami. I watched their game last night.
Yeah, they almost blew it.
Yeah, they did. What stood out to me, I'm kind of watching it through the lens of like,
how do they
playing against the Wolves, and so it's they again don't really have size. They have Bam,
right,
and then it's Kevin Love who actually I would just, or what I noticed watching the game. You remember how he just felt like really like a role player for Miami after the deadline in the playoffs last year. He's more of a feature of that team now.
Interesting.
It was for the game against Detroit, at least, which to me signals like more of a commitment, to playing him, which in the context again of the Wolves, like the three bigs they're really going to face are Bam, K-Love, and Thomas Bryant. And that's a lot of opportunity, I think, for the Wolves to capitalize. Obviously not as much on Bam, but in ways like Rudy's like 5 inches taller than Bam too. Like he can have his situationally can be effective against him too. I just think this Miami game is a real opportunity for the bigs to bounce back, just given the way the Miami roster is constructed.
Yes. How did they shoot the three last night? You recall?
I have it right here. Miami shot 8 of 22, 36.4%.
Yeah, kind of average.
Low volume.
Are they still playing a lot of zone? Did you notice?
No, it was not as. I mean, I'm watching at like midnight last night.
Sure.
So I wasn't super, but no, I normally would pick up on that some. I don't think so in that game as much. It was. It was kind of the same usual characters. They got like Jaime Jaquez in the mix now too. Duncan Robinson came off the bench. Caleb Martin. They start Kyle Lowry, Tyler Hero, Butler, Kevin Love, Bam. I think the one thing I wrote down, I was like, the Jimmy Butler like pump fake pivot thing. He has gotten so good at that, but he is obsessed with it now. Like every single, what I'm talking about? He's kind of that like little ninja stance. What I'm talking about?
Move,
yeah. It was just so much of it, and he's just
because he's so strong. I mean, I think he figures. Most people figure, all right, if I get my man up in the air, I'm going to line for two. He figures if he gets his man up in the air, he's getting an and one.
Yep, because he
I
knows
mean,
where
he
to take it.
really thinks he can go through anybody, and he can go through people much better than most players.
He might be better than DeRozan at it now, who has
Yeah.
been the gold standard
Right,
of it.
right.
I was just, I mean, again, watching one game there,
No,
but
but I mean, that's why he does so well in the playoffs, where you need hard fouls to get
Mhm.
the whistle. And
Right.
he coaxes hard fouls. And so you know, the idea of I mean, what'll be interesting is that Gobert still doesn't foul that much. I mean,
Mhm.
I was a helpful reminder in my Finch interview that is a strength of his.
For sure.
And so you do wonder, like, what would Shake Milton be like on Butler or something? Would that be the kind of guy, you know, he wouldn't have to
I'll tell you who it can't be. It can't be Ant.
no.
Because he's gonna get Ant with those pump. I mean, he got
Yeah,
like Jaden
yeah,
Ivey like
right.
so many times in that game. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
it. But it's also like, I mean, say Jaden's back, like that's the Jaden matchup, right?
Yeah,
And
that
then
would
you
be
go,
interesting. That would be interesting because, you know, Jaden is going to be, you know, Jaden's going to be already missed a game, anxious to prove the contract. That may not be a great matchup for him either.
but what are the alternatives? Because I
Well,
don't.
I mean, I do think, I mean, Shake's coming off the bench, but I like the idea of somebody 6'5", 230 rather than, I mean, that seems to me to be like the right
Mhm.
proportion.
Yeah.
Somebody who's built like Butler, only a little
Mhm.
bit bigger, you know?
Yeah. No, I think Shake would be.
I think Bam Adebayo is actually the perfect guy to guard Jimmy Butler, to be honest with
Well, he is not on the Timberwolves.
you. Right.
It's, I mean, and we learned this right away in game one against Toronto. I think every matchup it's worth talking about, like who KAT gets put on. They
Yep.
ultimately decided to put him on Barnes, at least to, you know, to
Right.
start the game. They put Ant on Siakam to start
Right.
the game, which I
Right.
found interesting. Nikhil ends up
And
starting.
Daw on the point guard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Schroeder, and then it was Conley chasing Anunoby. So I wonder, do they put Conley on Love
Ooh.
again?
Probably, you know,
But then who does
although
Carl guard?
yeah, it's not going to be Kyle Lowry.
I know. So it's just every
Right.
game you like put it up there. You put the 2-5 there, and you
There won't be
two
Tyler
fives.
Hero either. I mean, so yeah, you're right. It's probably, you know what?
KAT's probably got to guard Love.
I think I would put, yeah, it has to be. I was going to say I'd rather see KAT on Bam, but then who does Rudy guard? And it can't be Kevin Love. So
No.
yeah, you're right. So
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
wonder if Rudy could float. Could you get away with a float on
might
that?
be a good zone game.
Uh-huh.
No, how would you get away with the float? There's four other shooters.
Well, I
You
mean,
know.
how good? Obviously, Hero and Lowry.
Yeah.
Love, Love. I would make Love hit a few before I.
Mm. He. I mean, again, just one game, but he was taking them confident. I mean, he's a really good 3-point shooter. There's not a dare guy. The reason they put KAT on Barnes, this is probably the bigger takeaway, right? They chose to put KAT on Barnes because that was the least threatening 3-point shooter. That's the ideal KAT matchup is a guy who can't really shoot the three and isn't a huge threat off the dribble. Barnes has some of that off the bounce game, right? And that was what made me be like, I'm not sure they're going to actually go with that. But in this matchup, the one non-shooter is the 5. And so I think you got to put Rudy on him. But it might
Yep.
be
You do.
his
You
own
do.
game. Might be his own game.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it'll be a tired team probably. I mean,
and maybe
Boston can wear you out.
I mean, how many of those guys? That's probably the bigger thing here. Is Love going to play both games of the back-to-back? Is Jimmy?
Right.
Is
Right.
Lowry? You know, now you start
You
seeing
get
some.
into that thin bench.
Yeah, he's like, is RJ Hampton going to play? Is
I
Orlando
mean, they lost
Robinson? Like,
Strus and Vincent.
yeah, man,
So
totally.
what's
Like,
that backcourt like now?
no, I mean, it was somebody named Drew Smith played. You know, like it's
Right.
so yeah. I mean, Miami got they got worse in the offseason from a roster standpoint because you know they're banking on Dame and let Strus and Vincent, or had to let Strus and Vincent walk.
Right.
Actually, very similar to like the Conley and Anderson thing, if you think about it, with like the tax implications and all that, right? It's like we gotta let him go. But yeah, I mean, we'll see how that kind of plays out with who they play against Boston versus who they play here against the Wolves on Saturday. Quickly before we wrap, just like any random thoughts on like opening night or other games you've watched. I put down Okogie ! Brit.
Well, I mean, oh man, did you see that game? I saw it the next night. Okay,
I did not watch Nuggets Lakers because I was at dinner, but I did watch the Suns game.
I went to the ice house and saw some Jazz, but I came home and I saw began to see the Nuggets game because that was the first one I'd take.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the morning, I woke up and just decided to skip the second half of the Nuggets Lakers and dive right into Suns and Warriors. And Okogie, man, how smart is he all of a sudden? You always were impressed with the fact that he could, pick people at the four sometimes, or try to pick people at the four,
They're letting him do it, man.
And not only that, but he's cutting at the right times. There is so much gravity toward the perimeter on that team that he is camping out for putbacks, and then later in the game he did the anti-Okogie thing. He got the ball and went all the way to finish, which is something that never happens.
Yeah, and he hit the huge three with a minute left in the game.
And it was because he was so wide open.
Chris Paul just left him.
And wouldn't you? I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if you're going to leave anybody with a game on the line and a three-pointer necessary, Okogie's like in your top 10% of people would leave that. And by then he already had like 15 points.
He did.
So it was all gravy at that point. You knew he was going to shoot it with confidence. But he had a hell of a game. I will tell you, if Josh Okogie plays 2/3 that well on offense the rest of the season, then my Suns hate is going to look worse and worse.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Like actually watching a game of Phoenix, and you were very low on that team comparatively coming in. Yeah. Any change in your?
Well, I mean, they didn't have Beal. I actually think that the redundancy is an issue. I think when they put too many of those great shooters on the floor, they are going to be worse.
Mm-hmm.
I think you play all three of those guys, it's a mistake.
Right.
And so the fact that they didn't have to, at least that's my rationale now. I mean, if they all three get on.
Well, there's going to be, I just saw Sham's tweet come through that says Beal is again not playing tonight and Booker also isn't playing tonight. So it's already begun.
Right.
It's already begun.
You talk about load management, but I mean, the Thunder, I'm
watching it. I haven't even really looked at box scores. I watched the Wolves game twice, and the
Thunder looked good. The Kings looked very good against Utah. I went to bed when they were up like 18, but I assume they won. And I'll tell you, the Kings. I'm that if there's any team that I'm beginning to have misgivings about, it isn't the Suns. It's the fact that I think I had the Kings in the play-in, and they Sabonis led a fast break and did a behind the back dribble without breaking stride and had to be fouled.
Rudy's done that, man. Come on.
Not this way, he hasn't. I mean,
Rudy had another little break last night too.
Oh, that was awful.
Hey, it was a good steal.
It was a good steal, and that's exactly where it should have ended. Stole the ball.
It was like Okogie.
Looked up. Did you? I tweeted he Okogie'd it.
Oh,
I literally said that.
I did.
Yeah, no, he Okogie'd it, and I mean, he needed to just stand up straight, look around, and find a guy who could dribble better than he could and get him the ball. That's again, so often. If this team continues to shoot itself in the head rather than the foot, it's going to be really hard.
Yeah,
I hope it's an aberration, but that level of intellectual dysfunction on the court is I wasn't ready for that. I really wasn't.
I think there is a chance that, you and I are talking a week from now on Thursday, and we go, yeah, the Toronto matchup was just actually a really bad matchup, which isn't totally forgiving of all of it. Like,
No.
you need to
I know
be
what you're
able to
saying.
solve that. Like, that's what I'm when I
Right.
say I think this is going to be a good regular season team and not a playoff team, it's because there's these certain areas that you can pick at. And I think Toronto naturally picks at many of those areas that the Wolves are weak at, right?
Right.
So, if a week from now they've beaten Miami, they've went into Atlanta and won, and then on Wednesday they played Denver tough.
Right.
Like, you come out and you go, okay, those were three teams that they match up significantly better than Toronto, even though Toronto's the worst team of that whole bunch.
Right.
I would say that's just the interesting thing about this funky team and this funky roster is certain teams are going to be a problem with that. That's the glass half full. That's the optimistic look as we go.
And that has to be, that's the glass half full right now. Certainly. What I remember when they lost to the Spurs like twice in 3 games in the first 5 weeks or 3 weeks of the season, and we were saying, well, it's a new lineup, and Popovich is a master at getting the most out of his team and figuring something out.
Right.
I mean, in retrospect, no, the Spurs were a bad team all year. It was just a bad.
They had
nothing. Nothing to do with anything other than the fact that the Minnesota Timberwolves were dysfunctional, and that I still think, despite all and that you can regard this as a silver lining or as more grist for the bile, but essentially, if they had just played within themselves and within the structure a little bit, they would have won that game by a couple of buckets.
Well, again, and I've said this many times now, like, if the double big look was 5% better, you win that game. If Ant is a little bit more efficient, you win that game. If you get back in transition a little bit more in that third quarter when you got boat raced, you win that game. So it's the flaws and the things I think we're picking at are real. Yes. That doesn't mean they're going to lose all those every game. They had those same issues last season, oftentimes extrapolated in a way that it was even worse, and they still won 42 games. Right. So, they can be bad at kind of all three of those things all season. Mm-hmm. Not all at the same time, probably, and still should win more games than they lose.
Right. But let me, the thing that I always want to push back on when I hear people say that, and you're not guilty of this nearly as much as other people are, is this: they still won 42 games without KAT for 50 games and without this. Hey, not having KAT for 52 games didn't matter. They were a 500 team with him. They were a 500 team without him. There's a reason for that. They didn't have the problem of the two bigs together for 50 games too, as well as the advantages of that.
What I'm saying is that dysfunctional stuff takes away the ceiling.
Yes, that's a very good point.
That's all I'm saying. I'm saying they can be a 500 team because they have so much talent.
Right.
Even
I agree. I agree with that.
Last year.
And if that is if that's what happens again this year, then things will change dramatically. I mean, they can't say with a straight face, we're going to run it back, And so
we got 81 more games.
Yeah, we got 81 more games, and I think, quite honestly, you've got maybe 25 of them. It was always Finch's number.
Yeah.
Before you just say, hey, maybe.
And I agree with that. I do agree with that. Like, you do need to see all the stuff for 25 games to.
And then when you do, if it's still not there, if you are still adding 4 and 4 and getting 7, then it's time to do something about it.
Well, you know what it's time to do then is what they did last season was, okay, it's been 25 games and 4 and 4 equals 7, but X, Y, and Z, and Karl was sick in training camp, and Rudy, and all these things, all true things. But if it just can't be excuse listing again.
Yes, exactly.
If it gets to that point, let's get to that point first.
Fair enough.
For now, the silver line in the glass half full. Let's see if this was a bad matchup. Let's see if this was first game jitters, all that sort of stuff. I mean,
or a learning experience. Best of all, it's like, hey, we should have won that game. How many times are we going to do this? Think of all the games we should have won last year. It stops here. We start to play more intelligently. We start to understand what teams are trying to take away from us and don't play into their hands.
Instead barrage them. That's what this team did last year when they were good. It was like they got out by 20.
Right.
Because it clicks. When it clicks in a lot of different ways, and I could, home opener, all that sort of stuff, catching a little bit of that rhythm. Like I could see that happening where it's like, oh, here we are in the second quarter and the Wolves are on a 20-6 run. That is absolutely,
especially against a tired Miami team. Right.
Absolutely. I almost expect it, know. I think I would take the Wolves to beat Miami on Saturday. I don't know that. I mean, in part because of the back-to-back for them.
Yeah, but it's a trap game, right?
Yeah, right. I guess it's maybe a double trap in some ways, but
yeah, right.
We just got to see it a little bit more. We got it. What I'm going to be doing all year, and I think I'm did it with last night's game, is ask myself what was good and what was sustainable. What happened that was good and I believe can be sustained. What was bad and I believe will sustain as bad. And those are the questions. We now do have we can go off of last year.
Right.
And when the transition defense was bad last night, it's reasonable to assume that the transition defense will remain bad because it seems like something that is sustaining. Right. And the things that do work, Karl at the 5 or defending in the half court, they were awesome when it wasn't transition. They were an awesome defensive team. I take that as last night as something that will sustain because they did that last season. Let's think about those things that way. I think that's the healthiest way to do this, because it would be wrong to negate, to just be like, oh, first game, whatever, Karl, they're figuring it out. That would be wrong. And it's also wrong. I mean, if we're trying to look at this logically, to go one game, all right, trade KAT, which.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm hearing both of those things from the million.
Of course. Well, but I mean,
I got last night. Yeah,
that's the fan horde. There's a hive mind in fans that I always tune out. I mean, I respect their opinion, but we operate in two different worlds. I make that clear every time. I laugh at people saying we're destined, we're martyrs for the life. I'm just, well, you could always do something else with your life, but. Anyway, I feel like Conley needs to become more of a settler. I'm repeating myself, but it's because I'm trying to speak it into existence. I really do think that his usage needs to rise to like 18 or something. I'm sure it was below that last night. He just needs to settle this team down. If he has the ball on a pick and roll out on the perimeter, I like this team's chances of scoring however it happens.
Yeah.
And how often did we see that last night? We saw it in the first half a little bit. We didn't see it in the second half at all, third quarter at all.
Right.
That didn't the offense constantly feel hurried to no purpose?
Which is, and I think a lot of that is on Mike.
Yes.
And I like that you're pointing at a player on the team who has this super high Q score, right? And we're assigning blame there too. Whereas we're assigning blame to Karl as well, who doesn't have that Q score for whatever reason. And I would say to Naz as well, who, I mean, I think Mike and Naz are like the two, Ant aside, like the most universally just kind of everyone's on their side all the time, right?
Sure.
Well, Mike needed to do better at managing the offense, and Naz needed to take a deep breath and control. And part of his game thrives on chaos, but a big part of his games gets derailed by chaos as well. this is not just about Karl and Rudy and Ant.
Right,
It isn't.
right.
And I know, like most teams, it is about the big three in many ways. Because this big three is weird, it's about the connecting pieces. We learned that last year with Kyle Anderson.
Right.
And we in a positive way with Kyle Anderson. And we learned that
Right.
in a negative way with Jalen Noel. Like,
and D'Angelo Russell.
And exactly, how do these things around the big three click in? I think that makes a huge difference. And I'm also open-minded to the obvious absence of Jaden having a different impact on that. What if Jaden gets 6 of his little cutter buckets in the first quarter when the only thing that was happening was Ant scoring? You know, Jaden isn't just a point of attack defender. He's a 40% 3-point shooter and a low usage bucket getter.
And what if all the times that KAT did his up fakes and then looked around the court and then threw in the triple covered Rudy Gobert, there was Jaden McDaniels playing off KAT the way he does so well, you know? All of a sudden it's a dime for KAT and a bucket for Jaden, and both of them are feeling really good about themselves because those are the two things that make both of them like say, hey, gravy, you know? I mean, I got something that is extra tonight, you know?
Yeah. They had no extra last night. They got nothing. They got no extra from Nikhil. They got very little extra from Shake Milton, you know?
What happened to Nikhil Alexander-Walker? I mean, I don't know. The guy, he got muscle.
Man. It's the shot. No. Well, okay. I'm just saying offensively, that is what makes him special this year, is a high volume catch and shoot 3-point shooter.
Right.
And if he's hitting those at like 37, 38, 39%,
right, that
is a hell of a player on a $4.5 million contract.
Right.
But I mean, you know what I feel about that shot. Like that is the type of shot that is going to go in bunches, and it's going to go out in bunches.
I never trust people who can't see the ball as they shoot. Seriously. Isn't that weird?
And we both copped to the, like, we watched the first 2 weeks.
The idea that we don't know what we're talking about after a shot. You know?
Yeah, but it's
now today we do.
Yeah, right. It's a fun. I mean, I think he's going to get, particularly when the ball movement is back, Nikhil is going to get so many clean 3-point looks on this team, and that is a great, like, extra little thing to add into the offense that saves you a possession of somebody needing to barrel their head down or someone desperately trying to make an entry pass into Rudy. Like, you can cut some of those down and have some of the low usage guys, the Jaden cuts, the Nikhil corner threes, that stuff. It just takes the emphasis off of the obvious emphasis points, and none of that was there in game 1. And they still, again, only lost by 3 points. So I'm not freaking out about it. I'm really not. I mean, macro, I remain what I felt about the Karl and Rudy thing forever.
Right.
You know,
me too.
But we know this team can still win more games than it loses, or about the same. Win as many games as it loses.
I mean, what we know is that they have not worked through all of their demons. That certainly happened last night, and we just have to hope that, you know, it's like the boat you find in the beginning of the season. You thought you had totally cleaned it out. Well, you needed one more scour, you know, and now the boat's good. You know, maybe it's that way. But it needed scouring last night, and it was painful to watch.
Well, let's see what it looks like on Saturday. Britt and I will both be there at Target Center to take it in. It's gonna be a night to night thing with this team, where I think again, I want to caution myself of not over getting into one side of things or the other. It's a cliche. It's the marathon, not a sprint. Step 2 is against what will likely be a tired but still very physical Miami team. So I'm excited to watch that.
Especially if they lose to Boston, they're going to be dangerous.
Yes, I would agree with that. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I will be back to talk with Chris about that on Monday morning. So obviously, the game's on Saturday night. We're not going to record on Sunday, but that will be next up in your feed on Monday. We'll talk a little Wolves Heat before the Wolves head to Atlanta for game 3. Britt, appreciate you doing it. If you guys want to check out Britt's season preview, which has elements of it that were proved very prescient in how game one went. Check that out over at MinPost. Both of us have tweeted out links to that. So find that, give that a read. And yeah, until Monday with Chris, he's Britt. Follow him on Twitter at Britt Robson. I'm Dane at DaneMooreMBA. Until Monday with Chris, peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.